last minute change. I was not supposed to be here. And then when I was instructed to be here, I requested Rajiv to participate in whatever I'm going to do now. This is my third dialogues event, and I figured after seeing whatever I've seen, it would be boring to show my work once again. So, since it's an August gathering of, accomplished professionals, I figured let's just throw some things out and start a conversation. And a lot of this is prompted by what we've been talking about with each other, not in a non-conversational atmosphere, but what we've been doing outside against, by the bar or while eating dinner. So I feel what cued me into architecture was actually reading about architecture. Buildings are inspiring environments. They sort of give you some intellectual cues, but you need to go deeper, right? And I think what I've been noticing is that people are now working across scale and typologies, but we're not talking to each other. And we're not understanding or cross-learning across disciplines. That conversation just isn't happening. It's not happening possibly because we're just looking at images and we're being bombarded by the same kind of images, by the same 20 photographers on the same 20 or 30 journals over and over again. And it eventually just becomes a non-critical position that the observer takes, at least in an active conversation. And it's a position that we take when we're presenting, which is not open to criticism. Now, and the conversation in architecture tends to become polarized, right? One guy's talking only about engineering, someone else is talking about, the poetics of it. No, and there is a little throw-in of, the sociological aspect of it. But if you're going to build for 100 years, you need to be able to project all three. If you build an interior environment for 25 to 50 years, you also have to project all three. And we really need to do that because what we've done since the early 90s is build prolifically, redensified our cities. The cities have grown. There is really no space for more development within these urban, centers. And there is no, the rainforest cover is going down no matter what the maps are reflecting for you. The world's heating up. And I can't really say we are only to blame, right? There is also the Milankovitch cycles. There is there is enough dynamics in the Earth's own physical existence that heats up the atmosphere, cools down the atmosphere. So now they say we're at the end of an ice age, and it's only going to get hotter. But what we can do as architects is try and understand what these projections mean, because these projections have actually been true for the last 35 years. And these projections have been true for resource consumption, etc. I also, did a study once that actually, I made a presentation once that said, Al Gore losing the election in 2000 was a significant loss to the world because there would have been an environmental agenda, would have been a more serious one. Unfortunately, that isn't true, or it didn't happen, and we are where we are. And today, the world understands that there's little that you can do to stop this sort of economic, behemoth that has been created since the 1950s. Now, with a projected population of 10 billion, which, they now say correct and say tops out at about 9 billion, we're at about 8.3. What are we going to do since a large majority of that exists within the subcontinent? And we're not ready for it because we're still discussing architecture for the metropolitan cities as whether it should control nature or adapt to nature. Well, the truth is kind of out there, right? The writing's on the wall. You have to create architecture that controls nature. And it's a debate that most Indian architects are not willing to have. Maybe a few in this room, but I think most don't. Now that's been a trial and error exercise for a while, right? And some of that results in really interesting buildings that prove bad for the urban environment, and then they're brought down. But you do have to start embracing it, and at some stage we have to talk about it. Rajiv, that's your turn. Can you please talk? So, one of the objectives was to actually start talking about architecture that attempts to control the environment and push out efficiency, technology, the sort of good side and the energetic side of engineering, and refer to works of guys like Buckminster Fuller and Renzo Piano, essentially the British high-tech and whatever started the high-tech movement, because these guys really pushed out whatever's happening at scale today. And there is tremendous learning for that. Because a lot of what they projected may have been like a sort of, mad science project, but it does a lot of the learning in it, theoretically, engineering, the technique to build has actually come true, right? The most expensive building in the world, the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank, still stands. Look at it and see what it's been doing for the last so many years. Look at how it was built, what the objectives of the Hong Kong Shanghai Bank were, what it does to the plaza below it, and how they actually use that for not just, it was a financial trade, but what it actually did for placemaking for Hong Kong in itself. Or then start looking at, architecture outside the metropolis, which is, like I said, the one that embraces nature. And the conversation kind of slows down, right? But because that's buildings moving away from urban centers, that building moving away from where the mass of humanity is actually going to gravitate towards. And that's also where you were coming in. But I think when we talk about architectural projects and our practices and how you want to exist, what you want to create for the next, what legacy you want to create for the next 50 to 100 years, we forget that the buildings that actually exist for a long duration are the ones that nobody has the courage to break. It's not got anything to do with our architectural practices or the landmark that you've created. Look at James Sterling's work, a lot of that doesn't exist. The Hall of Nations by Rajewala brought down, no matter how many of us stood up for it. The Twin Towers brought down due to, a political and an act of terrorism. Whereas a five-star hotel built by an architect that everybody curses in architecture school still stands and built for another 100 years, right? Retrofitted and made to last. The building had nothing in it. It's just that nobody had the courage to bring it down and spend the cash to build on it again. Or we don't discuss what the Sydney Opera House actually does. Well, this was supposed to be Sydney Opera and the Kansai Airport. But, the most significant engineering exercise at Sydney Opera House is how it cools itself. Because all the cooling actually happens from from salted seawater. How those pipes have been built to withstand the next 100 years, and they still don't need to be changed. Whereas we're changing cooling towers and, sort of refrigerant piping every 20 odd years. The pace at which we have to build to do things. So even if you have a building that exists, this is one of our small projects. It started in the freezing winters, and it was built for the Prime Minister of India to sort of hold out at for a few hours while he was in Srinagar. It was only 40 guys from Delhi who worked in Kashmir. And they repurposed this building. It was that state on the 2nd of January, and by 20th of June, the building was ready for occupation. On 26th of June is when he actually went there. So the pace at which we have to build, the pace at which we have to start talking to each other, the understanding of how quick our documentation has to be, and how intense it has to be, is a conversation, again, that we don't have. We don't really debate on forums like this. And I really look forward to some of that stuff, because I think there's so much cross-scale learning, right? I was amazed at Yatin's presentation yesterday, because it just hit home to me. We're just not doing that. We're not discussing numbers. We're not discussing data points. But we're talking about small material techniques, whereas there's so much more to be done, right? And I'm going to ignore that. Move ahead. And What we're doing now in our practice is to actually start scaling up using the essential principles of British high tech to start working in modular systems, longer term industry-based research, so that building is a mass timber project built out of Manesar and then shipped to Goa. It took us 4 months to build about 8,000 odd square feet, where every nut and bolt was custom made for us, but it was made in an industrial setup with all kinds of certifications, so that we're actually cognizant of what's really going on and how this building is actually going to behave over the next 10 years, 20 years, 25 years, and 30 years. And then we're doing that for housing as well. So, we've started doing a lot of modular, low-cost work for scale, but what we're pushing in there is a serious understanding of how you're going to retain water. So now almost every project that's beyond an acre for us has not just, the regular rainwater retention, but we've actually got Venetian cisterns in every courtyard. So we're holding rainwater enough for the projected water use for that building for at least half the year. And yeah, I can stop there. We're also looking at new mobility, and we're talking to the government of Delhi for how to actually start breaking these, how to stop doing multiple infrastructure projects that actually don't work. So they have a metro, then they have a metro program, they have a bus program, both of which don't work, both of which are not funded well enough, both of which they cannot pay for. So we're starting, with Maruti Suzuki and with Tata Motors, we're talking about smaller modular transportation systems. And of course, we're doing some preservation projects as well, which are sort of unremarkable buildings that we're just extending. But I will stop there. I'll just flip through. So I think if we as architects start engaging in dialogue amongst ourselves, which is more critical, on forums like this, we might be in a position of leadership, because these forums are actually very influential, filled with influential guys. Part of presenting what you do is also where you're coming from and where you want to go. And that's what I thought would be expected over here, given this topic. Thanks.